For the first time in years, this Memorial Day weekend finds American forces firmly engaged in warfare over the skies of Yugoslavia.
Now, some analysts say the Balkans conflict must be contained to keep it from spreading throughout Europe and beyond.
It was more than a half-century ago that a European conflict engulfed much of the world. In fact, it was 57 years ago this month that American soldiers surrendered to the Japanese at Corregidor in the Philippines. The Americans were marched into prison camps in a hideous journey that's become known as the Bataan Death March. Joe Flanagan met with some of the survivors of the march at a Suffolk restaurant where they meet monthly.
For the last 17 years, they've gathered at Bunny's restaurant in Suffolk, still talking about a tragic moment in their lives that happened nearly 60 years ago. Their faces are old now, their hands wrinkled, but their recall of the living hell that was Bataan and Corregidor during World War II is as vivid as the day it happened.
The Japanese started killing Americans. I mean, just pulling them out of a line and killing them. You know, bayoneting them, shooting them. I don't mean 1 or 2, you know, I mean 20 or 30. And then we started on this march, and it was hell to pay.
It began in April of 1942. 11,000 Americans and 40,000 Filipinos marched for 8 days, heading to prison camps. Conditions were unbearable along the nearly 80-mile hike. Sharing books on the subject, other survivors talked about the hell ships, where men were stacked down below for the voyage to Japan.
Through an interpreter, the Japanese that was in charge told us it would take us approximately 12 days to get to Japan. Now, how could you survive 12 days like that? It's hot down there. We got off of that ship 39 days later in Formosa.
Hugh Merritt served aboard the USS Canopus and spent 3.5 years as a POW. Now, to honor veterans who fought at Bataan and Corregidor, he's having a monument erected at the Little Creek Amphibious Base.
No, I'm going to put it up myself. I'm going to fund it. I'm going to donate it myself as my donation to the battling ambassador of Bataan and Corregidor.
That impresses Andrea Mercer. She lost her uncle who served with these veterans. She agrees the time has come for a little recognition.
And I don't think that they should have to put out any money for it. I mean, I think that between the community and everything, I think they all, you know, deserve to have a monument in their favor and their honor. And not only them, but the men that died there, too.
Joe Flanagan for This Week in Hampton Roads.
Monuments and memorials are among the ways we make sense of war in our culture, and there is no monument born in more controversy than the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. George Duggins is national president of the Vietnam Veterans of America. He lives in Chesapeake. Martha Consalvo joins us from the National League of Families, an organization working on behalf of family members of prisoners of those missing in action from the Vietnam conflict. Her son was shot down in 1972 and declared dead in the early 80s. And Lieutenant Colonel B.B. Hamaker joins us as well. He's a veteran of Vietnam and the Persian Gulf War as well. And Colonel Russell Crutchlow is a veteran of the big one, World War II, and he was an aerial dogfighter in the Battle of the Bulge. Welcome, all of you.
And thank you very much for joining us. It's so interesting to have such a year span represented here. I want to ask each of you, if we can, about the current conflict in which we find ourselves, because unlike a lot of the armchair quarterbacks with no experience, at least 3 of you have direct experience in warfare, and Martha Ann, you certainly have experience with it as well. Colonel Crutchlow, I wonder, what do you think about the way we're prosecuting the conflict in Yugoslavia right now?
Well, in a word, I think it's ridiculous when you consider that, one, there is no objective really that's involves our national interest, that we have no plan as to what we're going to do and how it's going to end, and you just don't begin those events like that. There's no thought of termination time. All of these things make for another Vietnam issue.
Take it to Vietnam for us.
We should have learned in Vietnam, as we did from the British in World War II. You can't bomb somebody to a conference table. We tried that in Vietnam. We went into this, again, with one arm tied behind our back. We said we would not commit ground troops. You don't go into a situation like that, regardless of the purpose to save lives, to stop this ethnic cleansing. You don't go in with one arm tied behind your back. And we said no infantry, no ground forces, and that's why the Apaches are not in the fight right now.
Mr. Juggins, how about you?
I agree with the other gentleman. You can't win a war without ground troops. But what I hope comes out of this is if the American people don't like the war, don't blame the warrior. He's doing his job, and that's what has happened from Vietnam. They blame the warrior, so I don't want to see that happen.
Sure.
Well, speaking of the warrior, Martha, certainly I'm sure you had your own personal flashbacks when you heard about the 3 Americans who were captured and eventually released in Yugoslavia. Your thoughts on this whole conflict?
Absolutely, and I agree with these gentlemen. I don't understand what's going on, and it frightens me because it brings back memories of Vietnam. And while people say we lost the war, the military didn't lose the war. The policymakers and the government lost the war.
Where are we now with the effort to research the missing in action issue from Vietnam? It's 20-some years since the conflict. Most, I guess all of the missing in action have been declared dead. But do you still feel like there's information to learn from the Vietnamese?
Absolutely. And that's why we refuse to go away. The Reagan and Bush administrations were the biggest blessing to the family members. And we accomplished more in those administrations than in all the time before that. And we had high hopes of finding a resolution. But with the present administration, all the things, the advantages we had were taken away, all the leverage we had by the monetary funds and the relations, diplomatic relations were renewed. We gave them everything, and they're giving back piecemeal. And yet the policymakers say this is wonderful, we're getting so much cooperation, when the truth is we're not. There is information there, and it's a pity that it has taken. Well, my son's been missing 27 years, and he was shot down near the end of the conflict. And those wives and mothers and children whose father went down in 67, 60, they've been waiting all this time. And the parents are getting older, but we're never giving up. And we have the children, our grandchildren, coming behind us to pick up the banner, and they won't give up either.
Well, you know, despite it all, most of the folks that you see in the military live by that credo, proud to serve. But I guess what I want to ask some of the men around this table is, what is the effect that you think on morale when Congress debates how much money it should actually contribute to the defense budget when we are involved fully in an active conflict, yet the debate is over the dollar on Capitol Hill? Anybody?
Well, I think it was interesting that Congress gave almost twice the amount that was requested. I think it was $6 billion initially requested, and Congress ended up $12 billion for the Kosovo effort. To go back to what was being said, the Army put into effect a program in 1992 called Operation Full Recovery. They work out of Honolulu. They fly into South Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, all of Southeast Asia. The purpose is to have full accountability for all MIAs. I volunteered to go do that, but about the time I volunteered, my health started deteriorating, so I didn't get to do it. But I know that program is still ongoing.
Oh, it's ongoing, absolutely. But the problem was everything was going beautifully. And then the new administration came in, and the general that took over brought his own people in, and all of these experts that spoke all the different dialects, the languages, were forced out. So we had to start all over again. Now, as a mother, I don't understand that.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, I may be able to shed some light on that.
Do, please.
When I went back to Vietnam in 96, when we were there, VC used to mean Viet Cong, and now VC means venture capital. So, there's the problem right there.
Yeah.
You know, people are there making money. And you know, forget the issue, let's make the dollar. That's what's happening.
With respect to your question about appropriations and how it affects the men in the field, I would guess that it has little effect. What's had effect, however, is the fact that in the past 10 to 12 years, the funding for the military has shrunk to such a low level that their capability, their training, and their motivations have suffered as well. And now when they hear about new appropriations, it becomes meaningless to them because they're concerned with what they have to work with right now. And it's just, I don't think it has any effect on them.
I'm sure that you all watch with interest the series of hearings that took place on Capitol Hill where everyone seemed to be brainstorming about retention and how to keep people in the military and compete against the private sector. As you all see it, what is the underlying problem, in addition to what you've already mentioned, that is causing people to run, not walk, out of the military these days?
Well, I think when U.S. Air offer a guy $150,000 a year to fly a plane and the United States Army offer him $50,000, that's going to hasten his retreat. I think if you want to keep quality people, you have to give them quality benefits.
I would take one little exception to that remark, and that is that for a pilot, having been a pilot for 32 years, I know the most important thing in your life is flying. And if you don't fly, you get very unhappy. And if you're unhappy, then you start doing and thinking about other things. Most of the pilots that go from the Air Force to the airlines wouldn't go there if they had a job that was putting them to work every day in a cockpit.
So a piece of it is the money to fund their training operations has been so diminished that they're spending a lot of time on the ground. I wonder what role, too, some of the illnesses that we've been hearing so much more about, Agent Orange from Vietnam, Persian Gulf Syndrome. You, Colonel Hammaker, have been really struggling since you came back from the Persian Gulf War.
Yeah, it's been a bad 7 years now.
What's going
on? Well, my body is generating new bone growth. My joints are calcifying, so for example, my toes don't bend anymore.
And you relate that to what happened in the Persian Gulf?
Exactly.
Does the service relate that to what happened?
No.
How is that?
No, the service retired me fit for duty. The VA now has me at 100% disabled. It's a presumption factor, not in favor of the soldier. If they would treat me with 32 years of service like that, it really hurts down deep to think how they're treating that sergeant or that corporal.
Well,
or mistreating him.
Who is representing the individual who has an issue like you?
We asking the same question. Who is representing us? It's not, the VA system is there to serve those who have, for benefits for those who have served. And the system there is going into a HMO modality where they get you in and get you out and really not, they put a Band-Aid on the wound. They don't heal it.
Why is it so difficult for the government to accept Agent Orange, Gulf War syndrome? Why does it take so long for the process to pan out so that they understand that these are real problems?
Because they don't want to admit they made a mistake.
And plus they don't want to admit there's a flaw in their weapon system. They use, in the Gulf War, they use depleted uranium in their armor-piercing ammunition. And depleted uranium is harmful to humans.
I was the operations officer for the support command that ran all the logistics bases in the desert. When everybody was on their way home, I was part of the Joint Operational Planning and Execution System that programmed flights and ships and cargoes and tanks, and every enemy tank that was hit with depleted uranium, as he said, ran the gauge off the Geiger counter.
Jeez.
That's amazing.
And it's not only our wars, but the other wars, there were those same, the mustard gas World War I, atomic vets World War II. And the bottom line is, I think if America sends its sons and daughters off to war whole, then they should make them as well as possible when they return back to society. And that's not happening.
Well, getting back to the question of accountability, you have an issue. If you turn to a private attorney, is there an incentive for an attorney to represent you, to see what it is that can be done to make you whole based on what's happened?
What has happened so far is an attorney is into my wallet for $5,000 to date. It's going to be another $3,500 for him to appeal the Army saying I'm fit for duty, and he won't put pen to paper until he has the $3,500.
So does that make you bitter about having invested 32 years of your life in the service? I'm wondering how you're feeling about that on the other end of it.
I don't know how the gentlemen at this table feel, but I think it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on.
But, you know, part of the problem, too, is when
I often wonder why they pay.
Now that's what they should put on the posters for recruitment.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
there are not a lot of attorneys that handle veterans laws, period, because there's an old Civil War clause that limit the amount to their fee to $10. Because
$10?
Yeah, because the carpetbaggers during the Civil War were ripping the soldiers off who were getting pensions and that type thing. So Congress passed this law, and it's still, you know, there's very few lawyers you can find. I don't think of any in this area who practice veterans law.
Who really are willing to go up against
Right.
the VA.
Well, this is probably one of the most prevalent issues for veterans because this is the lasting effect of the service. So I wonder if, like so many others in Washington, there's a strong enough lobby in Washington, D.C. that will represent and overturn perhaps some of the things that we've talked about, including that carpetbag.
I've got to say that the service groups that this man is the chairman of, or groups like this, AMVETS, Purple Heart, American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, all are veteran advocates. AMVETS represented me at the VA, even though I had a separate private attorney. But if it hadn't been for AMVETS, I think I probably would have waited 24 months instead of 14 months for a solution.
There's a continual lobbying that goes on with these service groups on various issues. However, I sometimes have the feeling that those who are sitting and listening to their lobbying really don't take them too seriously.
And continuing issues too with regard to getting the missing in action issue resolved from Vietnam. To close that loop, what is it that you're looking for at this point in 1999? What is it that would do it for you?
I want the truth. The government has admitted lying to the families in the beginning, saying we were not in Laos, we were not in Cambodia. Tell that to the mother or the wife, the young wife of a man who was shot down or a ground soldier. It just doesn't make sense.
So you want to know exactly where they were, exactly what was happening, and to recover whatever remains are available
Exactly
to be
right,
recovered.
and I want more pressure put on Vietnam to give us the information that they still have. My son's category is to be in that category which says the Vietnamese have information on him. We have received word that they've been to 3 different crash sites. And even though they find the eyelets from boots and plastic and numbers, pieces of plane, then we're told, well, there's not enough information here for us to say that this is worth excavating.
So you want closure?
I absolutely need closure. I can accept if they will tell me my son died. I know he was a hero. I'm proud of him. And he was doing what he wanted to do, and he believed in what he was doing. So that's what I need is closure.
If I can open up this can of worms following that one, going back to the health issues, I'm sure all of you were aware most recently in the past year there was a bit of a rebellion of sorts. Quite a few military personnel who rejected the idea of taking the anthrax shot.
Yep.
And you know, as a civilian, you have choice. You know, I don't have to take that shot if I don't want to. When you're in the military, you have to follow orders. But given the history, some notable history of the military, I think that some of these soldiers are suspect. And what do we feel around this table about them taking that matter very personally and saying, you know, I reject the idea of having to take this particular shot?
I think that opens up the old debate of why we had Nuremberg. You know, you have to take, for your actions, you have to be responsible for them. And I think if it's my body and the government want me to take anthrax or some other experimental drug, I have the right to say no, even though I am assigned to the military and I raise my right hand to obey the Constitution and all those above me, but I still think I have the right to say no. It's like at Me Live, Cali would have said no, the massacre would have never happened. You know, we have to take responsibility for our actions, even though we are in a military environment.
Let's talk about that issue of raising your hand and swearing the oath. What do you think in 1999, heading into this new century, are the reasons that we ought to be involved in military interdiction around the world? Is it enough to say that we need to respond militarily every time there's an issue of genocide, as is at the bottom of this issue in Yugoslavia?
No.
No.
I mean, we can't possibly cover them all. These things have gone on for centuries around the world, and every ethnic group in the world and every geographic location in the world, and there's no way in the world that we, as bleeding as our heart may be, can do anything about all these things. And it's ridiculous for us to subject our military to those kind of tasks. It's costly, it destroys the training, and it does nothing for the military at all.
Well, let's focus on it a little more specifically. We did nothing about the ethnic cleansing in Cambodia, 2 million plus. We did nothing about the ethnic cleansing or tribal cleansing that took place in Africa. We sent aid. We did nothing to stop it.
So if our selective indignation is not a reason to respond, what do you think are the reasons, as we look at the globe we live on, that we should be using military force?
And in the situation we're in now, I think we're having visions of the past. I think what we're looking at today is perhaps even a repeat of what went on in 1939 Europe, 1940 Europe. I would caution our leadership, and I have to insert this if I may. She mentioned her son being a hero. There are a lot of 19 and 20-year-old heroes in our armed forces today. They are fine soldiers, airmen, Marines, pilot, you name it, Navy folks. And they're brave, and they care about the mission. And they're going to do what they're told. That's right. Because that's why we raised that hand that he mentioned earlier. Why I think it's going on now, and why do I feel like we have to be the lead for NATO in Kosovo or the new republics from the Soviet Union. I think somebody has to take a stand somewhere. And we're the big guy on the block.
And this is it. Well, now it's big guys and big gals.
Right.
We've got a military where we now have women, and that role seems to be evolving. And I guess I'd like to hear from you all around the table how you feel about that as the numbers of women continue to grow in the military and their role is evolving as we move forward.
When my daughter was very young, I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. She said, gosh, I think I'd like to be a nurse. I said, why don't you want to be a doctor? She said, can girls be doctors? I said, girls can be anything they want to be, Helen. And that's kind of the way, if I've taught my daughter that from the time she was a very young child, I can't think otherwise about women in the military. They're functional, they do the job, they're loyal. I mean, I've seen women and work right alongside men 20 hours a day in the desert. Never complain.
I look at it in the same light, and I use this analogy. If I were being mugged on the street and this police officer that came past was a female, would I not want her to do her job? You know, so I have no problem with females in the military.
But it is a very divisive question among military.
Is it still divisive, do you think?
I think it is, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily because they are female, because just as was said, some of them do excellent work. They do it better than a man could do in many cases. But still, among the military, the idea that women are taking over the job that I'm doing or he's doing becomes very difficult. Now, I believe in time that is going to be, the objection is going to be certainly lessened, but this is a time factor.
I think, though, there's no final fighting force, I think, other than us on this face of the earth than the Israeli army.
Yeah.
And at that point, at 18 years old, everybody in Israel go into the army,
Sure.
male or female. So I think that, you know, this is the only country, we're probably the last country to actually introduce females into combat. I mean, in Vietnam, there were VC cadre who were female. Other wars, if you go all the way back to history, you know, even back to Joan of Arc, she played an important part.
You think we'll see a draft again?
I hope so.
Really?
I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would help this country a great deal. It would give the young people a sense of responsibility.
And you put into the service people that never dreamed of being in the service, who had skills and interests otherwise. They bring it in, and they provide a great stimulus to the military.
It also feeds that spirit of nationalism
And
that
everybody,
we seem to be missing.
Yeah.
Well, as we move forward, because it seems that you guys are looking into your crystal balls, what do you see as the role of the military in the 21st century? I'll begin with you, Martha.
Never having been in the military,
Been exposed to it.
yeah, I certainly have. I lived it for 56 years. I don't know what the role should be. I really don't. I find it difficult to answer that, but I would like to say, you remember in World War II, the women pilots that ferried those big planes over to England, and I thought that was wonderful, and I think, too, that in those days, the women came into the Army, the forces, to relieve the man to go to combat.
Well, one thing about it,
Yeah, that's right.
we'll all be there. I think we'll have men and women one way or the other. Thanks to each of you for joining us, and may we wish you a very nice Memorial Day weekend. If you have comments about this or any other broadcast of This Week in Hampton Roads, it is very easy to be in touch with us. You may call our comment line at 889-9414 extension 1 or email us at twhr@whro.org. We'll be back in a moment.
Next on This Week in Hampton Roads, a program about what some call the prison industrial complex.
Virginia's in the prison business in a big way, but is it wise to create an industry around criminality?
We'll consider the business of prisons and the nature of incarceration next time on This Week in Hampton Roads. Thanks for the company.
We'll see you next time.